You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series, Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the fifth Doctor story, Frontios. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to get your very own Secrets of Doctor Who t-shirt or phone case or another kind of merch by visiting our merchandise store at sqpn.com/merch. You can see my Mysterious World shirt that I'm wearing that says, it's always aliens. And so you check out our Doctor Who version of our merch there as well. And another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy is called The Catholics of Oz, which you can find wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Oz. That's OZ. So we are talking about Frontios. Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens in this one?
This week, the Fifth Doctor, Tegan, and Turlough arrive on Frontios, one of the last remaining outposts of humanity after the Great Disaster. The colonists there are in bad shape. Their colony ship crashed on the planet, and now they're subject to constant meteorite bombardments, so conditions are very primitive. Also, one of the meteorite bombardments apparently destroys the Tardis. The colony's leader, Captain Revere, has apparently died and been pulled into the ground, only he's not really dead. While vulnerable, he was taken underground by a race of giant snails called the Traitor's. Most of them aren't intelligent, but they are psychically connected to an intelligent giant snail called the Gravis. They have gravity powers, and they used them to pull down the colony ship and cause it to crash, and now they're using them to pull down the meteorite bombardments on the colonists. They also have a burrowing machine that they're using to dig tunnels to make a gravity motor inside the planet so they can drive it around the universe and wreak havoc, like the Daleks tried to do with Earth in the first Doctor's story, The Daleks' Invasion of Earth. Only their tunneling machine needs a living mind to drive it, as opposed to just having a steering wheel on it. And so they plugged the human colony leader, Captain Revere, into it. But he's used up now, so they plan to plug his son, Plantagenet, into it. As conditions deteriorate on the colony, Turlough begins to have a racial memory of the Tractators. They attacked his own planet ages ago, and he remembers that without contact with the Gravis, the rest of the Tractators are just a bunch of harmless burrowing creatures. So we're headed towards a critical failure point resolution. In the underground tunnel, our heroes discover the dispersed, fragmented remains of the Tardis, and the Doctor tricks the Gravis into pulling them back together. This seals him in the TARDIS's separate internal dimension, rendering him unintelligent and harmless. And the Doctor and Tegan drop him off on an uninhabited planet. Afterwards, they come back to Frontios to pick up Turlough and bid farewell to the human colonists, who can now make a new start. The end.
All right. What'd you think of this one, Jimmy?
Well, it had stuff I liked. I thought that it had flaws too. One of the things I liked was I think Turlough has now settled in as a character. He's not. I mean, originally he was introduced as unwillingly a bad guy, but he was unwilling, and eventually he chose good. But he still had a real whiny aspect to his character, where he just complained, and he's not doing that now. He's much more likable in this story, and he got something meaningful to do, although he's kind of hysterical doing it as he's having his racial memory emerge.
Yeah.
But I liked him in this story. What I didn't like was the whole destruction of the TARDIS thing doesn't really make any sense. Because everything we've been told is the TARDIS is basically invulnerable. And so why would it get taken out by a meteor strike? And they try to lampshade this by having Tegan say, but the TARDIS can't be destroyed and it can't just come apart. And the Doctor says, well, apparently it has. And that's all they say. And so that's hand waving. And then why are all of its component parts underground? What did the meteorite that shattered it drive the parts underground? That doesn't make any sense. You need a massive explosion for something like that to happen, and we didn't have a massive explosion like that, so that really doesn't make any sense. I also don't like the critical failure point resolution. because I never like critical failure point resolutions where there's this one thing you got to do, kill the main vampire and all the rest of them die. It's like, okay, that's essentially what we have here.
Yeah.
I did like some of the world building. I thought the middle part of the story, even though it's just a 4-parter, I thought it was a little slow. We had a bunch of stuff happening that I'm not real clear on. Like, why were the tractators pulling down? Why did they care about the colonists? Why did they pull them down? Why did they cause their ship to crash? Why are they causing meteorite showers on them now? Exactly. I mean, They tried to explain some of that, but if they did, it went by so fast, I didn't really get it. So I think there are some logic issues here, but there are other things that are okay.
Yeah, I mean, I gathered that they needed a few bodies to run their machinery. Their technology requires humans to be attached to them,
or they could just run it themselves. I mean, humans, like when we design burrowing machines, we design them to be run by humans. We don't design them to be run by monkeys or some other species.
Well, in fact, I feel like so. According to the Tardis wiki, originally their technology was going to depend on human body parts to be operative, like a brain in place of a computer,
or human like cadaver remains, but they decided that would be too gross,
right? Especially for this era of TV, they didn't feel so bad about it doing later, but but in this one era, it seemed too much. So I gather maybe it's a remnant of that where they needed bodies to run more than just their one burrowing machine, but the rest of their technology. But you're right. Like, why were they dropping meteors on them? And why not let them flourish? Cultivate your human machine parts instead of. It didn't seem to make a lot of sense in that case, especially since humans are nearly extinct in this era, as they're talking about at the beginning of this. One of the things that comes up early on too is the Doctor says. The TARDIS has drifted too far into the future. Like it's near at the end of time. I didn't get that.
Well, so the end of time is kind of a concept, I guess, in Doctor Who that comes up occasionally, and we occasionally go there. It doesn't really make sense because, at least based on current science, the universe is going to experience heat death, and where it becomes so entropic that there are no significant events anymore, and it just kind of fizzles out and then remains fizzled out forever as far as science knows. So apparently in the Whoniverse, there is sort of an end of time, and we've been there a few times. Gallifrey is currently at the end of time. We went there with the 2-parter with at the end of David Tennant's time, where we found the Master, and also last remnants of humanity, just like Frontios. And we've been there in Frontios. So apparently in the Whoniverse, there's sort of a range of the universe's history that where the Time Lords are supposed to stay, I guess, and they're not really supposed to go out of that, but here they've drifted farther into the future than that.
Okay. And while they're doing this, the Doctor is running around the TARDIS tidying up. And again, we didn't really get an explanation for that.
No, it's just character moment, and they're explaining. They didn't need to explain why the hat rack would disappear, but they're giving us an explanation for why the hat rack is going to disappear.
Oh yeah. I mean, they could have just have the hat rack.
Not be there next episode.
Yeah. Although they make it a key part of this story, but yeah.
That's one of the things I liked. So when the TARDIS gets destroyed, all of it vanishes into the ground, except for the hat rack, which for no apparent reason is standing there on the top of the ground. And when the Frontiosians when the colonists accuse the Doctor ridiculously of being a spy who's drawn down the meteor showers, Turlough defends him by picking up the hat rack and using it as a weapon, and they conclude that's what they've been using to call the meteor showers. And
he points it at people.
Yeah, and it's funny because I can see someone from a far future culture is not going to know what a 19th century hat rack looks like.
Like the critical failure point problem. Another like trope that really bugs me sometimes is the irrationally suspicious problem. There is like, it's one thing if they had a rational reason to suspect that the Doctor and Turlough and Tegan were in league with this unknown enemy who is bombing them, on a regular basis. But it just doesn't, like, moment after moment, there is no rational reason, especially since the Doctor is in the line of fire. He's helping, people. In Plantagenet and his he's kind of like Sergeant Major. Yeah.
Brazen. What a trait name that is.
I mean, just over the top in his in their suspicion and aggression, and it didn't.
They didn't come around
right.
though. Yeah,
they do.
They do come around though, which is nice. And Plantagenet has some kind of heart attack, apparently because he got a glancing blow from a meteorite on the chest, I guess.
Yeah.
And the doctor restores normal heart rhythm, and so he that's what causes the turnaround. Is okay, so he just saved the leader's life, so we can trust him now up to a point. So it's, at least they don't leave them being irrationally suspicious, but they are irrationally suspicious, at least from the way this has been set up, because the Doctor looks human and Tegan and Turlough look human. I mean, Tegan is human and Turlough looks human. So if you got a bunch of human colonists, it's like, hey, more humans. You ought to assume you're on the same side.
Right. So the setup for this, I think, is interesting. Is that they've crashed on this planet more than a generation ago, or at least a generation ago.
It's within the first generation. So it's been, they had 10 years on the planet after they crashed, where they were farming, and then the meteorite bombardment started. And how long those have been going on, I think like Captain Revere is the original captain of the colony ship.
Mm-hmm. Right. So he was older. So, presumably, 20 something years, maybe, whatever. But they talk about how in the aftermath of the crash and then of the years of bombardment, they basically lost technology. They've lost knowledge. Although people would have living knowledge of things. They would know that these things existed. They wouldn't forget them. Right. But they would know that stuff existed. They would forget how to do things, especially given how many people have died.
I found my note. The crash was 40 years ago. Okay. So the bombardment's been going on for 30 years. Okay. And they've lost people. People have abandoned the colony. The what do they call them? Retrogrades. Retrogrades, right. And then so there, what do they call it? The long path back to knowledge. And Range, who is the chief science officer, is sort of leading that path. But there's another trait name. Yes. And there's a weird hostility toward that, even just like trying to regain the knowledge. There's a suspicion of the research room, which is a lab, a science lab, and Range himself. It was kind of odd. I could understand where you could build a storyline around people's suspicion of science because science is what got us into this mess, or something along those lines. But they don't really do that. Kind of a Canticle for Leibowitz situation. Yeah. But they don't really do that. And then there's a strange directive from Captain Revere that if anything ever happens to me, shut down the research room, which would essentially doom the colony, I would think, because they don't have resources to survive without recovering some of their technology. I thought it was a strange approach to it. But interesting. So a couple of comments I had are about the materials they use. Now, they've built this planetary environment in a studio. Yeah. And a lot of it looks pretty good, but there are occasional flaws. Like in the research room, after they get access to it again, Turlough is trying to deduce what the nature of the threat is against them based on the fact that they have these floors, these heavy metal floors, and then he lifts up a part of a hatch, and you can see it in cross section, and it's like, yeah, these heavy metal cardboard floors.
Yes.
There's also another point where Tegan, who is in an amazing leather miniskirt
In high heels.
in high
Throat.
heels, it's like, wow. But she's blocked a door, and they're trying to batter and ram it down. And when they finally do open it, you can see it's like, okay, they're using a plastic bucket batter and ram. They've modified like a big plastic paint bucket or something to have an end on it that looks like a batter and ram. But it's clear this is not some big heavy thing they're moving. This is a very lightweight prop.
Right. Yeah. There was like the research room was in the crashed ship, but when you lifted up part of the floor, it was the dirt underneath. So maybe as when it crashed, the ship had a removable floor, or maybe that deck got sheared off, and so underneath what would have been the research room would have been another part of the ship. But in this case, that's fine, I guess. They had these phosphor lamps that they were using for lighting, and the doctor is kind of a little bit incredulous because they're extremely flammable. They look kind of like glow sticks, frankly.
Yeah,
but
which is frankly what they, I'm sure, were.
Yeah.
I mean, so they're like a lantern, so it looks like a big glow stick in a case.
And they essentially become weapons because they use them to throw at the tractators later, and they explode and flame or what have you. I note the Frontiosans, the colonists, don't have firearms of any sort. They have basically clubs that they use. They're not even like electrified clubs or anything like shock sticks or anything. They're just, they really don't have any technology in this case.
Yeah, they do have more technology than like Tegan is used to. Now, Turlough is from a more advanced culture scientifically, so he's used to high tech. But Tegan is not. And I noticed that at least in this episode, Tegan is, she started out as a complainer. And in fact, she wasn't even meant to be on the Tardis. She accidentally got on board thinking it was a police booth.
Right.
So she didn't volunteer to be a companion. That just sort of happened around her. And I can understand her complaining, but she's to a significant degree evolved out of that. And like in this episode, there's one point early on where the doctor's trying to get Lighten going for the surgery that Mr. Range is running. And he tells Tegan to go get an acid jar battery, which is something she's not really familiar with. But just like Jamie with the second doctor, she just rolls with it. It's like, okay, I'll go get this thing, whatever it is. And I liked seeing that. I also like there's less bickering between her and Turlough in this. There is a little bit, but like in a critical situation, Tegan is starting to dig into Turlough, and he's like, can we leave the bicker until we're out of this? And then they move on.
Yeah.
So I think that the writers have a better handle on the characters and how they need to interrelate than we've seen in some previous stories. And apparently Peter Davison thought the same thing, that they finally for this got the sense of how his doctor should be. So that was nice. There's also a nice little bit of world building. This is the most we've ever learned about Turlough's home planet, which still has not received a name. The name is going to turn out he's a Trion, and we are going to learn more about his home planet in his final story that's coming up. But he also, so we learn about it. It was once attacked by the tractators, and that left a weird racial memory in all the members of his species. he also has a nice bit where he's debating whether he should go down into the tunnels after everybody or not. And Range's daughter, Norna, is there, and she's telling him, because he's just recovered from this experience of having this traumatic racial memory, and she's like, nobody expects you to go down there. But he says, oh, it's decision time, and he holds both of his hands up to her and says, pick one. And she picks one of his hands, and he opens it up, and he's got this thing in it. He says, this is like a 2 corpora piece or something, and you blow through it for good luck. And it's kind of a square, if I recall correctly, with a hole in the middle. And so this is just a nice little coin that's from his culture. And we know this nice little thing about it, that you blow through the center of it for good luck. I mean, that's just nice world building.
Yeah.
And then she opens his other hand, and there's another one there. And she says, so what's this? And he was going down there either way. But that's just a nice little moment.
Right. Right. Turlough is not, a blustery, brave hero jumping into everything. I mean, Jamie was always game to jump into the middle of things. Turlough is a little
he's more cautious.
He's more cautious, right? I mean, earlier in his character, maybe you call him cowardly, but I think he's overcoming that a bit and getting a little more game to jump in with the Doctor, despite reservations, which is good. I like to see that evolution of the character.
One theme that's prominent in this that we haven't mentioned is haven't really explored it anyway, is because they're so far in the future, the Doctor, under Time Lord rules, really should not be having any involvement with this culture. And he cites the fact of how new it is as one of the reasons for that.
Yeah.
And there's a founder effect. If you interfere with things at the beginning, it can have important repercussions later on. So it's interesting that, the Time Lords would be more willing to let him get involved with a culture that's established than one that's just being started. And so I thought that was interesting. But he's very concerned that the Time Lords never learn about this. and so like at one point after he's defibrillated Plantagenet.
Yeah.
Plantagenet wakes up and learns what's happened, and he looks at the Doctor and says, "You saved my life. Is this true?" And the Doctor, and I'm wondering, how is the Doctor going to respond? Because the answer is yes, but that could be dramatic, but it also could be lame to just say it that way. So I'm interested in what's his response going to be. And instead of doing the obvious yes, he says, "Not a word to the Time Lords."
Yeah. In fact, does he say, "Don't mention it"? No, really.
At the very end.
Yeah.
At the very end, as they're about to get in the Tardis,
that's right.
The colonists thank him for all he's done, and he says, "Don't mention it." And that was and then that's all he says, and he steps off and gets in the Tardis. And "don't mention it" was the perfect response.
Yes.
And they should have left it there, but instead they had Tegan follow it up with,
"Really?
No, really, he means don't mention it to anyone." And that was you didn't need to make it that explicit. It was nice the way it was.
Yeah, yeah. There is an interaction between the Doctor and Plantagenet that was a little earlier, where Plantagenet basically threatens to kill the Doctor, and the Doctor calls his bluff, says, "Okay, then kill me if you think and the Plantagenet orders it. "Okay, kill him." I'm like, whoa, the Doctor's bluff gets called, and he's wrong in this case. I thought that was an interesting moment for the Doctor to. Yeah. That's one of the things, again, about Classic Who, is the Doctor wasn't always right, wasn't always one step ahead of everyone. He was wrong at times. He should not have called his bluff. So I thought that was good. There's a whole thing where Tegan is assisting Mr. Range. He's not Dr. Range, apparently, but the science officer, Range. Yeah. She's assisting him, and she sees him pull out, after one of the patients dies, locked file cabinet, pulls out this file and writes something in it and puts it back. And she Tegan is so curious that she cannot resist. She ends up breaking into the file cabinet and looking in the file is called Deaths Unaccountable, and for some reason this is a big deal. Like I didn't understand why is it a big deal that you have people who die and you don't know why. Like I thought that was odd. Like especially when you don't have any technology and your medical supplies are rudimentary, you'd probably have a lot of people who died and you don't know the cause of death.
We're given to understand later that this is more like deaths of people who got pulled down into the earth by the tractators, but then it should be missing people.
Yeah,
because how do you don't know that they're dead,
right?
If you don't have the body.
Yeah, and we do get an explanation that from Turlough in his
raving state,
frothing at the mouth, literally racial memory. That the tractators can only grab you when you're in a weakened state.
Right.
So when you're near death or you're injured
dead,
severely.
Says. It could be either one.
Yeah. And so that's a key aspect of, why they don't just grab everybody, because they can't for some reason.
But they can pull meteorites down out of space?
And ships from orbit, and they don't seem to have that problem when they're in the tunnels right there. So, yeah, it was a kind of an odd bit. Maybe you need to be weak to be put in the machine, but Plantagenet didn't seem very weak.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a bit of a hole.
Mm-hmm.
But Captain Revere had made these laws against, going underground because the earth is hungry, which made me think of the sea is angry, my friends. the line from Seinfeld.
If the sea is angry and the earth is hungry, then the planet is hangry.
That's right. Give it a Snickers. So we have a lot of back and forth. So let's talk about the tractators, because apparently they were inspired by woodlouses. By the designer apparently had woodlouse infection in his house, infestation in his house, and decided to go with that design. But I think the tractators,
they don't look like woodlice; they look like snails.
A little bit, although they have that shell that is kind of like if you laid them down, they would kind of look like a bit like that.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But to me they reminded me a little bit of the creatures in Dot and Bubble. I know there's clear differences, but
yeah, except these have faces, which the Dot and Bubble creatures didn't really.
Basically, just had big mouths.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had apparently destroyed Turlough's home. I was confused a little bit about what was going on with Turlough until later, but they explained it. But at this point, the Frontiosians, the colonists, they start going every man for themselves. Like they start raiding supplies, and because the rumors are out, that Plantagenet got sucked into the earth, and that there's no leader, because Captain Revere is dead and his son is dead apparently, and so they start going crazy. And Brazen's like, we're going to start enforcing, martial law and death penalty on anyone who steals supplies, and then watches these guys run out of the ship, arms loaded down with supplies, saying, "You better run!" That was a little odd.
It was, although I liked. There was one of they call their security officers orderlies, and so. Brazen is the chief orderly, and one of his subordinates is a guy named Cockerell.
Yep,
which is interesting. I mean, that name always strikes me because I knew when I went to high school with a couple of guys who were brothers who were named Cockerell, and that's the only time I've ever run into that name. And they also had interesting first names. Their mom had given them. One of them was Rafe Cockerell, and the other was Buck Cockerell, and it's like. These are some interesting names. But in this, so you've got this subordinate orderly who's named Cockerell, and he, after Plantagenet has seemingly died and been sucked into the earth, Cockerell kind of goes retrograde. And he starts looting a little bit of food and stuff. He's getting ready to head out of the colony, and Brazen finds him and is being very threatening to him and takes him into custody and walks him out to the front door and lets him go. And he's surprised to be let go. And Brazen says, well, life in the colony is difficult, but life outside the colony is something else. And so he lets it, but you're of no use to me now. So he lets him go. He doesn't have any reason to kill him. He could, I guess, make an example, but he doesn't. So he lets him go, and basically Cockerel turns around and is immediately mugged by a bunch of retrogrades who start beating the snot out of him. And Brazen says to one of his, someone suggests to Brazen, you're just going to let him beat on him? And Brazen just says he made his choice. And it's a notable moment that involves, so there's some complexity here, because Brazen has enough of a conscience. He's not just going to kill the guy, but he's also not going to rescue the guy. And it's like, okay, you made your choice. You're going to take the consequences. I'm not getting involved any further. But he did let him go. And so it's a morally complex moment that I find interesting.
It also, as the scene goes,
Brazen ends up being a good guy, by the way. I mean, he comes off as a bad guy in the beginning, but he ends up being a good guy. In fact, he sacrifices himself in the end by hooking himself into a burrowing machine and making it go crazy.
He saves Turlough, who was being an idiot at the time about running around, instead of escaping. Cockerel ends up surviving. Like, he gets beaten up, then because he's weakened, he starts getting pulled into the earth. The doctor sees what it looks like from below and distracts the tractator who was dragging him down, and Cockerel survives, and he's the only man to ever survive this process, apparently, which nobody ever sees, I guess. It's really weird.
Well, some people have seen people being dragged down into the earth.
Okay.
And here they see him survive, and he's the only one known to have done that. So they think, if he can survive the hunger of the earth, he can survive anything. So he can be our new leader.
It's as far as ways of selecting new leaders, it's not the worst I've seen.
Yeah.
So the leader of the Tractators is called Gravis, which is interesting, given that gravity is like a natural gravity beams seems like a natural ability in them. Who knows about Gallifrey and the Time Lords?
Yep.
And wants a Tardis to continue to do whatever he's doing.
Well, he wants to travel. He speaks in terms of he's been confined here for, I guess, thousands of years with no way.
500, I think I heard.
Yeah. He's been confined here for a really long time, and he wants the ability to travel, which is why he's building the gravity motor for the planet. Except, given the nature of his species, they're going to cause problems wherever they go. Yeah. And because they infect planets and then it goes badly. But he does know about Gallifrey and the Time Lords, which is interesting. It's nice to see that, something like that, and you might be able to explain it in terms of this is so late in the universe that other races have had time to learn about the Time Lords. And so I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah. And apparently Tractators, sort of like bees, where like they have a queen bee, Tractators only have a member of the colony or whatever, the swarm at a time that's intelligent, and who's intelligent leads all the others, which would seem to be a poor evolutionary trait. Let me put it that way.
Well, except they're psychically linked. So the other Tractators are able to receive telepathic guidance from the Gravis. And there are eusocial animals here on Earth where, like bees and termites and stuff, where you do have a queen that has abilities that the others don't, and the others then typically on Earth, they don't breed. But I guess it could work if you have like one who's intelligent that's guiding the rest of the colony.
It is. I would like with bees. If the queen dies, they feed the royal jelly to another bee, and it becomes a queen.
Maybe the make a new Gravis. Yeah,
can make a new Gravis, which would be interesting, given that the doctor's solution was to take away the Gravis. Do the remaining tractators then create a new one? Frontios.
Evolutionarily, they must have some way to do that. One would think.
Yes, that doesn't bode well for the colonists who stayed behind. Hopefully, it takes a long time. So let's see. Tegan. There's a moment where the doctor is chumming it up to the tractators, to Gravis. Trying to get on her side. And Tegan is just clueless about the why the doctor is treating her so poorly. Like, Tegan, get a clue. Go along with the story,
The doctor ends up trying to pass her off as a defective robot.
Yeah, she gets a little offended by that, but better than the alternative.
She shuts up once he's made it clear you're a robot in the story I'm telling.
Oh man, yeah. So I was kind of yelling at Tegan with the Tegan. Get a clue.
There's another nice line where they're down in the tunnels and Range, who the doctor has told to stay in the research room, follows the doctor down and he catches up with the doctor. And the doctor's like, I told you to stay in the research room. And he's like, nothing doing. I'm coming down here. And the doctor says, oh, well, a risk shared is a risk doubled. Come on.
Yeah, that was good.
As opposed to a load shared is a load halved.
Right.
And or a burden shared is a burden halved. And but you think about it, a risk, okay, if you're sharing the risk, now it's a double risk. You're both in jeopardy.
Right. Any other notes about this one, Jimmy?
Not particularly. It was an okay story to me. It wasn't a great story, but it also, I've seen a lot worse.
Yep, I agree. I'm not as high on it as apparently the cast were. They really liked this one, apparently.
I think primarily not for the plot, but for the characters in it and how their own characters were treated. Because the Doctor and Tegan and Turlough are all better in this than they've been in other stories as characters.
I see. And then this leads, the ending of this episode sort of is a cliffhanger for the next story, which is Resurrection of the Daleks.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting close to the end for the Fifth Doctor. We're wrapping up his story in just a couple more, I think. I think there's like only two more before the regeneration, the Caves of Castrovalva.
Caves of
Androzani. I mixed up the beginning and the end. The Caves of Androzani. Interesting to see. Just as they get close to the end, we finally, according to them, get the correct writing for the Doctor and the rest. All right, so I guess that'll do it for our discussion of Frontios. We'd like to take a moment now to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Janelle K., Tracy H., William S., Judd E., and James P. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So we'd love to know what you thought of Frontios. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord, or you can watch us on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. We can see our whole episode there, and you can leave a comment, you can subscribe, and of course make sure to hit the bell so you get notifications of new episodes. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing a Seventh Doctor Big Finish story called A Life of Crime. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who. And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest, and remember, Frontios buries its own dead.